What is happening, boys?
Hello, hello.
Jason Staples, you ready to rock?
Oh, I'm ready.
Sounds like you're not through your mic, but it sounds fine. The dulcet tones. Welcome into Inside Carolina's Game Plan podcast. It is the 13th one we've done this season. Wow, time has flown. A little bit bigger of a game than we've seen so far this year. Carolina and Clemson, 8 o'clock in Charlotte, Bank of America Stadium on Saturday night. Greg Barnes, from historical perspective before we get rolling.
Yeah, this is pretty easy, Tommy, right? Only the second time that North Carolina has won the Coastal Division. Therefore, the second time that North Carolina has played in the ACC Championship game. Carolina had a great run 7 years ago, won the last 11 games of the regular season, had an outside shot at the college football playoff had they beat number one Clemson. Of course, Carolina lost that game on a controversial. Well, they didn't lose it on a controversial onside kick flag, but that prevented them from rallying for the upset. It was a 43-35 game. But hey, I think a lot of people after that game thought that okay, North Carolina has arrived. Larry Fedora's got them where they need to be, and it just didn't come to pan out. And it's very difficult to reach that level and stay there. And so it is a building process. Mac Brown, yeah, we could probably have a long conversation about it, but this team's probably a year early in terms of getting to this point. But they've been very opportunistic. They're 6-2 in games decided by a touchdown or less, and so then they have a chance. And I know the fan base is a little. I don't even know what you would describe it as. You got some who are just elated to be 9-3, and others who think that North Carolina, is 9-3, but they should be better on the defensive side of the ball. The offense should have played better the last 2 weeks of the regular season. But look, if you win on Saturday night, nobody's going to want to have those conversations. I mean, it's about winning the ACC. Carolina has not done it since 1980. Tommy, I don't know how old you were then. I was 3, which is wild. And as Buck Sanders laid out earlier today in his column, I think it's a really good read. There was no championship game back then. And it was just a matter of North Carolina doing what they needed to do on the field. And at the end of the year, they had a better record than everybody else. So therefore, they were the ACC champions. This is like a big, legit deal. So this is the modern era of college football. Everything's going to change very rapidly with the ACC going to just one standings next year. We're done with divisional play. And then, of course, with the college football playoff expanding to 12 teams in a couple of years. So everything's about to change and get unique, but they can close out divisional play with a ACC championship, and it'll be a good game on Saturday night, Tommy.
Indeed, you talk about worlds about change with the transfer portal. I mean, next week's going to be absolutely nuts, win or lose for North Carolina, I think. Recruiting, NIL, playoffs, just all sorts of crazy stuff. I was 9. Wait a minute. Yeah, I was born in 71, so in 80, I would have been 9. I was trying to think. It's not like basketball. I was born in May, so I was 9. Long time ago. Obviously, a lot of hair ago and a lot of life ago. Jason Staples, first of all, where were you in 1980? Second of all, sort of perspective for Carolina going into this game. None of what's happened so far this season matters. Only thing that matters is the 60 minutes on Saturday night. Where do you stand as far as what it means for the Carolina program?
Well, I wasn't in 1980, so
not even a twinkle in somebody's eye.
Nope.
God, we're old, nope. Greg.
I'm a man.
We are.
I'm 40.
Wow, I said that a long time ago.
Yep. Well, if you're bitter about me being a little bit young, you can come after me. I'm a man. I'm 40.
Just blew my eardrums.
Not a kid.
Turn my hearing aid down.
Yeah.
So where's this at? Where's this at for Carolina?
Well, I mean, it's your second shot at a title in what, 6 years. So I mean that I think is probably your best illustration of things. If you're thinking about where this is, I mean, second shot in 6 years. That's the first opportunity that this group of players has had, and it had been quite a while before that. So, you know, as just about anybody who's been paying attention to Carolina football will say, it's not, or will notice, it's not like this program has been competing for conference championships, year in, year out. This has been a sleeping giant program. There's no question about that. We've talked about that at least since I've been around here and before, that this has been a sleeping giant program. But there's been a whole lot more sleep than giant over that time. And, this is really big, not just because of the opportunity to win the conference, but because of what that would mean in terms of taking another step forward in the waking up of that program and of the potential moving forward. I mean, this would be obviously that much bigger if they'd taken care of business the last 2 weeks, because then you're looking at, a real chance of making it into the college football playoff, which when you're then trying to pitch things to recruits and all of that for, a couple of years from now, that carries weight. So it would have been even bigger. But even at that, you say, look, we now have demonstrated that we can beat and will beat Clemson. We are now in position where anybody that we recruit, we can tell them with honesty, you come here, you might be the difference between us making the playoff and otherwise. And that carries weight. So I think this is a big game, not just for, conference titles matter, but not just for that, but for the continued development of the program.
Yeah, I think, and Greg, we sort of talked about this over the last couple of weeks as it was sort of unfolding, and then with David Hale as well. I think the pressure's off North Carolina, but I think there is more pressure on Mac Brown and his staff to get this done, because going in at 9-3 after 2 losses, I think they can play free, and the players can all. The Heisman talk's gone, the playoff talk is gone. But I think this program's at a point here. 9 wins is great for North Carolina. I've said for decades that it's an 8-win program with the floor of 6 or 7, should be 6 or 7, and a ceiling of 10. And here we are bumping on the ceiling. About that portion of it, Greg, I mean, this game, I think this is a pressure-filled game for the staff, whether or not they admit it, whether or not Mac Brown admits it. And I think the last 2 weeks have made it more so for them, at least, and maybe less so for the players, which is better, because players can play a little free. I don't know. Where you stand there before we get into the nuts and bolts of what will happen?
It is an interesting dynamic, isn't it? I mean, this team is playing for the conference championship, first time and since 2015. A few people thought they would be here. I would say in the preseason, most probably thought it'd be Miami or Pittsburgh. I know I did. But yet there's this weird kind of dichotomy of, if Carolina loses, when you pair it with how they closed the regular season, now you're talking about 3 straight losses heading into the bowl game. Which, how did last year end? 3 consecutive losses to FBS teams. And Wofford will discard. But that was not how they wanted to close. And so they're sitting at 9-1. And kind of to your point, now if they lose on Saturday night, they go to 9-4, and you're like, ugh. And I think it's more, yes, it's the coaches, but it's more really about some of the fans who are already saying, oh, wait a minute, there's a lot of talent on this team. How have they not capitalized? But yet, if you win, then, well, you completely overachieved, and you're a year early, but you had success. You're a conference champion. Clemson's won 6 of the last 7 ACC titles. You knocked them off the pedestal. So it's like the highest high, and certainly not the lowest low. Carolina's been there, as Jason alluded to. but certainly a letdown after where everybody thought this team potentially could be a couple weeks ago. And that makes it interesting. And the other part of it too is, Carolina has signed 3 consecutive top 15 classes. And right now, with how things are shaping up, it's going to be probably a stretch for them to finish top 25 unless they get some things go their way here in the last couple of weeks before signing day. That says a lot about the recruiting momentum and how last year's record really hurt. Well, this is an opportunity Saturday night to probably get back into the front of some of these recruits before signing day. But more importantly, it sets the stage for the next recruiting cycle. You can handle one class that's not elite, but when you start stacking those, that's when you kind of struggle. So you can go 15, 15, 15, 25, 15. But if it's 15, 15, 15, 25, 25, 20, that kind of sets you back a little bit. So, yeah, there's a lot on the line here, Tommy.
Yeah, it's always important to have that perception of positive momentum, and I think that's why this game is huge, because it wouldn't be a perception if they win, but it's hard to sell that there's momentum if they don't. But let's talk about. Let's go ahead and get into it. Clemson is 6.5, 7-point favorite. Folks in the chat are talking about the weather. I think it's going to be perfect football weather. It may be a little wet. That field is field turf now, which I did not know until I guess last year when I noticed it was field turf. But it's going to be perfect football weather in Charlotte. Jason, let's dig right into Drake May and the Carolina offense. They've struggled over the last couple games, and they've struggled with defenses that did things a little bit differently but had sort of the same success. Drake May and Josh Downs are the keys here. So let's talk about them first, and then we'll branch out. What did they need to do? What does Phil Longo need to do to get these guys back on track and to feeling good about themselves, especially early?
I think they got to be patient. The way that Clemson is gonna attack them defensively is going to follow the Georgia Tech and NC State blueprint that we've seen the last couple weeks, which is going to be to force them to get the ball out quickly, but not in positions where it's likely to go for big plays. Now, I mean, that sounds like the most obvious thing in the world. Like, well, yeah, get pressure on the quarterback and don't allow big plays, and you're going to have a lot of success. But Clemson has the defensive line to do that. And, Dabo Swinney talked earlier this week about, look, with Drake May, you gotta really be disciplined in your rush lanes. You cannot let him move around and beat you that way. You have to keep him in the pocket and force him to make plays there when he's not quite as comfortable, which is, for what it's worth, further confirmation of everything you and I've talked about, Greg. I mean, when we talked about what's the book on Drake May, it's don't allow him to make plays on the run, and don't let him move around in the pocket and create, a little bit of extra space to where he's comfortable seeing lanes and all of that. You've got to get into his lap, make him uncomfortable, and make him throw over you underneath. And last 2 teams that they've played have been able to do that. And he hasn't looked comfortable. Some of that, I think, has to do with some of the offense and how the offense itself has responded to some of those things. But some of it has been Drake and the receivers not really looking comfortable against that particular look. So to me, it's really about Drake being willing to take what's there right away, take what he's given, recognize when Downs is bracketed and when that's not there, and be willing to come off of that very quickly and go to him. So, yeah.
Yeah, people are in the chat talking about State's defense is better than Clemson's and all that. I mean, they're similar. But Longo talked about the patience part of it, Greg. And, in the same answer, I think he talked about bombs away. And, that's what's been missing from Carolina a lot this year. Antoine Green, when there's an opportunity, could maybe make some hay against this Clemson secondary. But the question is, and I missed it, the chat's going so fast. Bull Hill is back. Bull Hill, of course, caught up in the wash of the bots last podcast and was out and was had a indefinite suspension of one game accidentally. Are we capable, we being North Carolina, of being patient on offense? Greg, you've watched them a lot. You've watched Phil Longo's offense a lot. It seems like no matter who the quarterback is, they tend to get a little antsy when they have to put together a 10, 15 play drive. They had some success doing that against NC State, but what do you see here from Drake and these guys? I mean, Clemson's secondary has some issues, but Clemson's front seven does not.
Right. And I think that the point about NC State, and Jason touched on this last week, is, I mean, their secondary is probably the best in the conference. And so when you pair that with that 3-3 front, especially with Durden in the middle, I mean, that's a tough defense to go against. And Georgia Tech had a lot of success kind of covered on the back end as well. Clemson's the lead up front. David Hale mentioned that with Venables not being there, they're maybe not as aggressive, at least in terms of maybe having an alpha up front that's doing some of the dirty work, although KJ Henry's pretty close. They've got some guys up there that are stout for sure. But yeah, if you're able to buy some time, you can have some success against the Clemson secondary. I mean, look what Sam Hartman did when Wake was able to buy him some time. So I think it's difficult for Carolina because they have struggled to run the ball of late. And when you struggle to run the ball, whether through a running back or with some of these design runs that Jason did a good job kind of breaking down this past week, if you're not able to get ahead of the chains, it makes everything more difficult. And Drake, I believe it was 12 passes he threw last week, longer than 10 yards, and threw 49 passes total. That's what PFF had him down for in terms of attempts. So it's not like he's just chucking the ball down the field like Hal did at times. However, when you're not able to run the ball effectively, and these teams are doing a good job keeping him in the pocket, you do have to be very sharp. You have to be patient, even though there's pressure coming. And as a freshman, that's just been a challenge the last couple of weeks. And so, yes, they have to do a better job of giving him some time. I would assume we'll see some more max protect just to give him some shots down the field. Because I think that's the only way you can beat this Clemson team is get some easy scores. But yeah, this just the patient part of it, of understanding that Downs is going to be bracketed, but still look for him on some of those, whether it be a glance or a slant or whatever, a little drag route. Find him over the middle, utilize your tight ends, take chances down the field when they're available. Don't force it too much. But that's the being patient part. But if they're not able to establish a ground game, if they're not able to buy him enough time, we can criticize Drake all we want, but that's just really hard to execute against when you're talking about a good defense like Clemson.
Yeah, Jason, is the game plan here, and I keep going back to the Pittsburgh game plan, maybe on offense and defense, but specifically, it seems to me, granted, it's been a few weeks, that Carolina really took the short stuff early against Pittsburgh over and over, out of the backfield. Josh Downs on some short stuff. Am I missing something there that could be effective against Clemson?
Well, again, Clemson's a really good tackling team in general. And that's the thing against NC State, is that when they did go short on some stuff, none of those short plays turned into bigger plays. And actually, that's one of the. I think this is worth considering in terms of Josh Downs' season and really the last 2 years. One of the most surprising things to me, when you actually consider things and when you look at the numbers from the last couple seasons, I think when we all think about Josh Downs, we think of him as a big play waiting to happen. As a guy that's just dynamic as a wide receiver, and he is that. But maybe the most surprising thing for me has to do with his overall yards per catch and the number of tackles, of missed tackles forced that he has. So Josh Downs on the year, just for the record, has 101 targets and 83 catches. Greg, question: how many yards after catch per reception do you think he's got on the year? Just guess.
Can't be many. 200
per reception.
per reception. Oh, 5.
You're close. It's 4.
Yeah.
And get this, on 83 catches, any guesses on missed tackles forced total?
I'd say not many.
Yeah.
Handful.
5.
Real close. 6. That's really interesting to me, because he's been almost uncoverable one-on-one in terms of getting open. But in terms of making a play after the catch, that's not really been there for him all that much. Now, if he's got open space, he's taken some of that. But generally speaking, he's been a guy that's caught the ball and then gone down within a couple yards. 4 yards per catch of yards after catch, and only 6 missed tackles forced. Now, for perspective, if you want to think about another wide receiver who's had a year like Josh Downs, and there haven't been many of them, but a guy that's a comparable player, Zay Flowers from Boston College, who's on a team that is just not nearly as good, obviously, doesn't have the quarterback. He's got on the year 78 catches. So we're comparing pretty close to apples here in terms of total number of catches. Any guess on the number of missed tackles forced for him?
24.
Getting close. 15. And that's with a guy that basically every team double covers all game, every game. And, almost double the number of yards after reception. So, interesting thing for me here is, I think you're right. Look, they're going to have to go underneath. They're going to have to do a lot of what they did against Pitt, when they play against Clemson. They'll have to be patient and take that underneath stuff. But they're also going to have to find ways to actually make some of that underneath stuff into bigger plays. I mean, one of the things that really hurt them against NC State was, I can think of 2 or 3 times where you hit Downs on, a 3-yard route or whatever, and you're really counting on him to get, say, 6 or 7 on that, and he got 3 because NC State kept stopping those guys. There's one very, very important play that was Antoine Green coming across the field and catches it at like the 6-yard mark, and it's, I think, 3rd and 9 or 3rd and 8, and he went down at 6 yards. You're going to have to find ways to not just get some catches underneath, but you're going to have to make some plays after those catches as well. But I think the other side to this, though, and this is where I think Greg said something right big time earlier, which is, if you're going to beat this Clemson team, odds are you're not going to do it with like small increments in 5-yard completions, 4-yard completions going all the way down the field. The success rate against their defense is not going to be real high in small increments. To beat them, you're going to have to do the other thing that they did against Pittsburgh, which is win some battles over the top. You're going to have to have your guy beat their guy. You're going to have to have your quarterback have enough time to set up, make a quality throw, and get your 45, 50-yarder out of it. You're going to have 4 or 5 of those. I think for North Carolina to win this game, they're going to have probably 4, maybe more. I'd say 5 or 6 pass plays over 40 yards to beat this Clemson team. But somewhere in there, 4 or 5 is probably putting you in competition for this game. But if you don't have a few 40-plus yard pass completions, I don't think you beat this Clemson team.
A couple things, Tommy. Clemson has allowed 16 plays of 30 yards or more, passing plays of 30 yards or more this year. So 1 1/4 a game.
And you're going to need 4 or 5 of those.
Right. But how did North Carolina kind of land an uppercut against Clemson back in 2019 off the bat?
Yep, deep.
De'Ami
Downey,
Brown.
Cook, number 8, who's an
And that was-
NFLer.
And
Yeah.
from a quarterback who could really throw the deep ball.
Correct. Tommy, you mentioned that the Pittsburgh game, because I think that is kind of a good example. Pitt runs the quarters, so they do put their men on islands a little bit more. And I think when you look at Drake's stats, that very well may have been his best game of the year. He rushed for 69 non-sack yards on 15 carries. So that's really good. But when he was kept clean, he had an 81% adjusted completion percentage for 245 yards and 4 touchdowns.
That was against Clemson. Against Pittsburgh.
Against Pittsburgh. That is elite. And if he does that Saturday night, Carolina's got a chance. No doubt about it.
If he does that Saturday night, I think Clemson wins the football game.
Carolina wins.
I think Carolina wins the football game. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's can it be done? Yes. And Pittsburgh's got a really good defense. But when you compare to what happened against Georgia Tech and NC State and Notre Dame, Virginia to some extent, that's more of the common occurrence, whereas Pittsburgh is more of the exception when you look at kind of what's transpired over the last couple of months. So he's got it in him, but that's what it's going to take, I think, for this offense to really flourish.
Yeah, I just think that's what they need to do. Because I felt like against NC State at least, and I'm sure the numbers and the stats and the plays and all proved me wrong. It just felt like against NC State, they said, we're going to run it, and we're going to run it, and we're going to run it come hell or high water, and we're going to see if they can stop us. And I just think they need to come out against Clemson and sling it all over the field, but take those short things. Longo talked Monday about there was one play against NC State where I think he took the Nesbitt one or took somebody no, it was J.J. Jones underneath. And if he'd have waited a beat longer, Downs was wide open down the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And, so they've got those type situations. But the problem is if you wait for that one and it never breaks open, then it's a loss or whatever. And I also thought it was interesting, Jason, is Longo said they did not expect the runs from May to be really big, long, effective runs. They expected it to be 4 and 5 and 6 yards and then come back and go 2nd and 5 or 2nd and 4. I think if May's having design runs for less than 5 yards, I think Carolina's in trouble against Clemson. But I think if he can scramble for 10 to 15 at times, I think they've got chances. Question: can Carolina's run game be relevant in this game? I would say just throw it. If he's going to throw it 49 times against State and it felt like they didn't do much, I'd throw it that much against Clemson. What do you think, Jason?
Well, so the one game where, if you're looking at Clemson on the year, they've given up some yardage and they've been, on the ropes defensively in 3 games. Right? So that's the Notre Dame game. Notre Dame ran for 263 yards on 5.6 yards per carry. That's a lot. The Florida State game, Florida State ran for 206 yards on 6 yards a carry. And then the Wake Forest game, which is the outlier here, where Wake Forest ran for 110 yards for 2.82 yards per carry, but just shelled them deep. Now they had some backup defensive backs in that game. That's the outlier where you had Wake Forest's wide receivers who we saw, they're pretty good up against some backups for Clemson. And Clemson got shelled until they decided, you know what, we're going to go too high against them and we're going to force them to run. I don't think North Carolina has the running game to do what Notre Dame and Florida State did. I mean, those are 2 of the best rushing teams in the country. I don't think they have the running game to go for 5.6 or 6 yards per carry against Clemson. Now, look, if you can do that, you're going to win. You're probably going to win this game. But I think they need to be better than Wake Forest at 2.82. You know, they're going to have to run it well enough to be balanced in this game, because that defensive line, if you do not keep some sense of balance, if you don't keep them honest, they're going to be in Drake May's pocket all game, and he's going to be wearing those guys like a suit all game. So you're going to have to find ways to keep them honest. What I do not want to see, and this is where, yeah, I understand that those run plays from Drake May, those quarterback draws and things like that in that game were not intended to create big plays. You know, they're hoping for 4 or 5 yards on those. Thing is, about half of them didn't get that. To me, I don't understand the logic of calling that play to Drake May when you're just going to get your quarterback hit, first of all. If you're calling that to get 4 or 5 yards, he's going to get hit, and they're going to take their shots on him. And you're not giving him a chance to make a play with his arm, where if you call certain short stuff to get 5 yards, you're probably going to get 5 yards with him on short stuff. Just sling it. And if it's not there, then he might be able to run it. I don't quite understand that whole logic of, well, we need to get 4 yards. Let's run the quarterback in this context. I do think NC State gamed him. So one of the things about the 3-3 stack is it's going to give you what looks like a light box a lot of times. And so it's going to look like you ought to run. You know, if you're a team that has a box count, it's a box count team, which Carolina is. And you're going to look at, okay, how many guys in the box? All right, this is run then. Run. Well, the 3-3 stack is designed to give you a light box and then all of a sudden have 2 other guys come into the box after the snap. So suddenly it's crowded and you should better to throw. And NC State gamed Carolina a little bit in that game, and I thought they won. They won with the chalk in their hand, as it were. They were the team that had the chalk in the hand last. And to me, in this one, I think you got to dance with the prettiest girl in the ball as long as you can. Mm-hmm. You know, you got to make sure that she's on your arm all night, and that means you take your Heisman Trophy quarterback, and if you have to throw it 50 times because they keep giving you that light box look, but then suddenly they're coming downhill and they're going to turn that into an anti-run look, then you have to throw it. You have to get the ball out of his hands quickly and have some counters to that. So to me, you have to run enough to keep them honest so that they are turning that light box into a run stopping look, but you've got to throw it out of those looks most of the time.
Yeah, and Tommy, when we talk about Carolina's run game, you want to run to kind of set up the pass a little bit. As Jason said, with the State's look, it can kind of fool you, and that's kind of where I was going. If you look at what Carolina did against State, especially on first down, they tried to run it a lot. They ran it 16 times on first down, average 1.8 yards per play on those first downs.
And it was really frustrating to watch.
Yeah, Carolina was 1 of 12 on 3rd and 5 or longer in that game. So when you get behind the chains early, it really makes it difficult. And we know what State did defensively. They were able to get, 11 QB hurries, 2 sacks, 9 tackle for loss. Here's the stat about Clemson that you have to watch out for. Clemson defensively forces offensive drives that gain 0 or negative yards 20.5% of the time. That leads the Power 5. That's 4th nationally.
And that's entire drives. That's not plays. That's not first down play.
Entire drives. So one of every 5, they're holding an opponent to no yards.
You're punting on 4th and 10 a lot.
Correct. So how do you get there? You don't do anything on first down, because if you're behind the chains, that tilts everything to the defense's favor.
And with that defense, when it's tilted, it's over.
That's right. When you've got guys up front like that, and look, not to bang on Spencer Rowland, but he has struggled this year. And yes, Austin Richards has had a good year at left tackle. But, I mean, who do you want to have to block? Miles Murphy? KJ Henry? I mean, even Brian Breesy, whenever they slide him over? I mean, good luck. And so that's just why you have to be stout. You have to provide some help. I mean, if Rowland gets decimated and he doesn't have any help, that's on the coaching staff. That's not on him.
Yep.
Well,
And
and we talk about he struggled. In fairness, he's got a 66.1 grade on Pro Football Focus on the year. Now, offensive line grades you have to kind of take with a little bit of grain of salt from Pro Football Focus, but that's a healthy number. That's okay. That means he's played at the average to above average number. That's a number in green on Pro Football Focus, which means that you're playing at a level good enough for your team to win. Now, that's not at all conference level. That's not, Drake May's numbers are in the blue. But that's pretty good. A lot of teams in the country will take 66.1 from their tackle. But the problem is 66.1 is going against some guys that are in the 90s from Clemson.
Well, if we hear KJ Henry's name called a lot on Saturday night, it's probably a long day. And what gets me is nobody talks about Brian Barisi. I mean, I've watched Clemson games. It's like that guy's not even been mentioned except for his off the field stuff, and bless him dealing with all that and playing college football. But KJ Henry is who you hear about. Spencer Rowland's got to be good, got to be better. Let me throw up a question here, and this is an interesting discussion to me. Some of those stats are unbelievable. And we're going to go to our Inside Carolina YouTube chat correspondent, Slagle. Better question. What type of run plays could be positive against Clemson, Jason? Like we've already talked about, running up the middle on first down or thereabouts is not the ticket. What can Carolina do? I mean, have we seen a legitimate running back draw this year? Not more than a handful. What can we see that Carolina can have some success other than Drake May running against Clemson's defense?
Well, both Florida State and Clemson, or that is Notre Dame, both Florida State and Notre Dame against Clemson had some success with gap scheme stuff. So running counter especially. And I think that's and that's something that Carolina does do. Carolina doesn't really run the draw, so you're not going to see it. The draw is one of those plays that you get if you're throwing a lot of drop back stuff, deeper drop stuff, and then teams are getting upfield on that. Then you might run the draw on that, but it's not really your best bet to pair with what Carolina does in terms of their overall passing game. So you're not going to see a bunch of that. Normally, if they're running draw, they're running quarterback draw. So, and I personally, I would like to see them run very, very few of those in this game. I don't want to see them expose Drake May to those shots. When if you want to run it, if you want to keep them honest, run it with your running back, run some jet sweep type stuff if you need to, and some stuff off that action, do some of that stuff, but don't really call stuff designed for your quarterback. I think you call the run play and you tell Drake May, if that look and that look aren't there, then you take off. And that becomes a quarterback draw, but you give him a chance to make a play with his arm first. I think that's what you have to do with him. But to me, what you've got to have some success with on this one is a few variations of some gap scheme stuff, of some counter, of some maybe some power, but counter and various looks of counter off of different formation stuff is really where Florida State and Clemson, or Florida State and Notre Dame, had the most success against Clemson. So I think you do that, and I think you're trying to get the edge on counter. You can run counter a few different ways, and a lot of times counter is kind of designed to hit the B gap or the C gap. So between the guard and the tackle on the play side, as that block comes down, it's kind of off that tackle. So it's going C gap, and then you're getting those pullers, and it's coming in there. I think with Clemson, you're trying to kind of pin that inside a little bit more and let that back on the edge a little bit. And I think that's what you have to do some. Your back has to have really good vision and hit that upfield if there's any crease. So I think that's probably your best bet. And you're going to see Clemson trying to fit against that. And I think you're going to see North Carolina taking their shots on that play. thing about it is that you're also going to get some, zero and negative plays on that play sometimes, and you have to be willing to take a few of those to get a couple potential big plays in that for a back that can run. So
Tommy, Elijah Green's averaging 2.2 yards up the middle on his carries. Most of his success, kind of to Jason's point, has been off the edge or in the B or C gap. So in any kind of counters, in any type of power where you can get an extra blocker in front of you, I think that's going to be the key for Carolina to find some success on the ground.
Yeah, and somebody's got to make some plays. I mean, people are going to have to step up. A lot of people in the chat, and we could talk about this. It's already almost 10 o'clock. And we're not even to the defensive side of the ball, but I want to stay on the offense. I mean, Jason, is this a game where somebody like Bryson Nesbitt could be big? Antoine Green, I think we need to see play well for Carolina to have a chance. He needs to make some plays down the field. But Bryson Nesbitt, Morales, they hadn't really talked about Morales the last couple of weeks. Copenhaver had almost a great catch there in the end zone. Is this a tight end game for North Carolina? Or is that a possibility, or Clemson's linebackers? I mean, Trenton Simpson is really good, but he's not the biggest guy, and we've talked about Carolina's smallish linebackers and Eccles and Dilworth. Where can Carolina sort of take advantage with those tight ends?
Well, I mean, their linebackers are all really good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at those guys. Trenton Simpson's really good. I mean, we all know how good he is because of how hard Carolina went after him as a high schooler. I mean, really talented player, but he might be their third best linebacker.
And none of them made all ACC, and that's why people are getting all jacked out of whack. Trenton Simpson made third team all ACC.
Yeah. And, Barrett Carter and, Jeremiah Trotter, those guys are really, really, really good. They're not tall. Jeremiah Trotter's 6 foot 230. You've got Barrett Carter, 6'1", 225, but those guys can run. And, Simpson as well, a guy that can run. I do think this is a game where you do take advantage of the tight end a little bit. So again, I want to go back to the games that Clemson has had some trouble defensively. Notre Dame completed 9 passes.
In total?
Total.
And they waxed them?
Yeah.
Wow.
Part of that, though, is a pick 6 and another key interception against DJU, which skewed that. Notre Dame really only was their offense only scored, really was responsible for 21 points out of that 35. So, but they completed 9 passes. 4 of those and a touchdown were to Michael Mayer. So that tells you something, in terms of where the advantage was. Florida State was another game, as I talked about a moment ago. Florida State was a game that they gave Clemson all they could handle defensively. And Florida State, they completed 24 passes and had a good night. They 254 yards, 2 touchdowns against them, no picks. And for them, 6 of those catches were to Johnny Wilson, who is actually, of Florida State's receivers, probably most similar to Bryson Nesbitt. Mm-hmm. He's just lined up out wide, a little quicker than Nesbitt, but he's 6'7". And they used that big matchup basically to throw some verticals against Clemson and win those one-on-ones. And Wilson won some one-on-ones in that game, and basically that allowed Florida State to move the ball. It was sort of a trump card when Florida State got in trouble. It's like, all right, throw it up to the big guy.
Yep.
Which is what Notre Dame did with Michael Mayer, right? They did that with their tight end. Florida State did it with their big wide receiver out wide. Bryson Nesbitt can do both, right? So he becomes a really important guy. By the way, the number 2 receiver for Florida State in that game in terms of yardage was their backup tight end, right? So now you're starting to look at like, okay, that's 2 teams in a row that you've got the bigger receiver types and big tight end types have had some success. And that tight end, by the way, is more similar to Carolina's other 2 tight ends. So then you look at the third game that Clemson had trouble with defensively, and that's last week against Spencer Rattler in South Carolina, Little Carolina, and they weren't able to run the ball at all. The 1.7 yards per play run, but 360 yards passing in that game. And a bunch of that was to Antoine Wells, their big play receiver, who's most like Antoine Green on the outside. And then other than that, they had four receptions to the tight end. So you had 9 catches by your Antoine Green type and Antoine Wells, and one of them was a 72-yarder that was really the play that changed the game. And then 4 of those catches for 62 yards to your tight end. So I think that this is a game where Antoine Green and the tight ends are huge factors in this game, and you've got to find ways to get those tight ends and Green featured in this game and get some easier outlets to Drake May, going to Green over the top and on some stuff where he can use his speed and his size against their corners in some one-on-ones. And otherwise, you've got to use your tight ends in some one-on-one matchups. So I think that's core to what you're doing for against this Clemson defense.
Yep. Empty the bag, break some tendencies, do all that good stuff.
You better empty the bag in a championship game.
Yeah. If there's anything left, you need to be shaking that bag up and down and pouring out the rest of the lint. We got anything else on the offensive side for North Carolina? Y'all know my standpoint. It's been that way for 12 games this year. Greg, you got anything left offensively before I take a break?
Nope.
Let's talk about Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-shirt.com.
Woo!
Sponsors of the Inside Carolina podcast, certainly great friends of Inside Carolina subscribers. They give you 10% off your order if you're a premium subscriber. And why would you not be? You need to get that 10% off. You probably save a year's worth of Inside Carolina subscription on your discount here at Holidays with Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street. Alumni owned and operated. Take care of them. Anything you could possibly ever want Carolina related, they sell it there. And they're good friends and good people to boot. Take care of them online or in person. National guys pay the bills. It's the game plan. It was a long offensive segment. It's 9:50 on the East Coast. We'll be right back with the other side of the ball. All right, guys. It's the defensive side of the ball for North Carolina. It's time to talk about it. DJU, Greg, has been bad. It has been really bad at times and was probably one of the worst performances from a quarterback. From a Power 5's perspective, last week against South Carolina, what was he, 9 for 29 or something like that? So he's due a bounce back. He's been good at times. What's Carolina got to do against this guy? Because he is a monster if he gets rolling.
He is. He's a big guy. They've been utilizing him more in the run game with some success. I'm going to push back a little bit, Tommy. I think DJ too often is compared to those who came before him. So compared to Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, yes, he's been bad. I think Carolina fans especially have wanted to make the mistake or have tended to make the mistake of comparing him to, say, Zach Gibson or Ben Finley, who were 3rd and 4th string quarterbacks that had success the past couple weeks. There's a massive divide between DJ and those guys in terms of talent level. I'll break it down like this. What makes Drake May so special, and the reason that he won all these awards, Tommy, to give you a golf analogy, it's important to hit shots close because it'll give you a few birdie opportunities. But the way that you make sure that you put good scores on your scorecard is you avoid the bad scores and the big numbers. So it's more about bringing your floor up than it is your ceiling until you get to the elite of the elite, the PGA Tour, those guys. Drake May, when kept clean this year, has got a 93.7 grade, which is elite. About 3,000 yards, 81% completion percentage, 24 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Under pressure, though, his grade's 70.1. There are good quarterbacks in this country who don't have a 70.1 grade when kept clean. That's what separates Drake from everybody else. is even when he's under pressure, he has been good. Okay. Now let's talk about DJ. When DJ's kept clean, his grade is 89.8. He's not far from Drake. Okay. He's got a 76% adjusted completion percentage, about 2,200 yards, 18 touchdowns, 6 picks.
That's solid.
When he has time to throw, he's really good. Now, when he's under pressure, which is how it comes into play against Carolina, he's got a 44.4 grade. That is not good by any stretch of the imagination. 34.2 completion percentage, 329 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick. That is a massive divide between DJ being kept clean and DJ under pressure. What does Carolina struggle to do this year, Tommy?
Bring pressure? Is that what it is?
No, not bring pressure.
No,
Yeah.
get pressure.
Yeah, there's a difference. A lot
Correct.
of people think like, oh, you just got to bring pressure. You just got to blitz. No,
Yeah.
you can blitz and still not get pressure. And that's been Carolina.
Yeah, and we need to clarify that. Folks scream blitz, 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 blitz. That's not the point. It's actually getting somebody in the area code of the quarterback.
Right. And
pressure.
To address that specific point, DJ's been pretty good when blitzed because Clemson's done a good job kind of keeping him protected. I mean, he's got 75 grade. Let's see, 65% adjusted completion percentage, 700 yards, 8 touchdowns, 3 interceptions when blitzed. That's solid. It's when that pocket collapses that he has issues. So, yeah, it's not about necessarily just calling up blitzes. It's getting home. And the number that Carolina fans do not want to hear is that he's only been under pressure on 25.7% of his dropbacks. So Clemson's done a good job protecting him. And I'm sure some of that's him getting rid of the ball now that he's a year older. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is just a classic case of North Carolina has to figure out a way to get pressure on him. They haven't been able to do that really all season long. And we're going to talk a lot about Will Shipley and Clemson's run game, but it's not just about saying, hey, we're going to take away the run game and make DJ beat us. Because if you do that, he can beat you, especially if you don't get pressure on him.
Carolina on the season has 35 quarterback hurries on the season.
Oh, that's brutal.
In 12 games. So they are getting less than 3 times a game. And this is the stats on GoHills.com. So I'm not cherry picking these from some whatever. 35 quarterback hurries for Carolina. And, of course, 8 interceptions. But we can talk about tackles for loss and all that stuff. Jason.
Well, and I'm going to add to this from what Greg said. We all remember, look, Carolina played Notre Dame. We saw Notre Dame earlier this year. They're pretty good up front, right? They got some pressure. They're pretty good at that. They only got pressure on DJ and the Clemson passing offense 19% of the time.
Which is about standard for Clemson. Did you say 20% overall?
Yeah, so it's a little below the average on that. So, yeah, that's and the interceptions. By the way, there were 2 interceptions in that game. One came when not blitzed and not under pressure, and the other was kept clean.
So when I say it needs to be the Pittsburgh game plan and they forced Slovis to beat him and he could not.
Not that.
It's not that on this side of the ball. Jason,
Nope.
What? So, I think everybody's got to realize, and I asked, we'll talk about a couple comments Chiswick made Monday. I thought a couple were pretty enlightening. But it's not a thing of bringing pressure. It's a thing of getting pressure. So what can Carolina do differently to mix that up? Because if they blitz and they don't get there, they might as well just run somebody off the field and tell them to stand on the sidelines. We'll play 10 against 11. So what's the
Lay
plan
down
here?
and play dead. Yeah.
I have made Jason get laughing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what people don't understand. They say blitz, 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 blitz. Well, if you blitz and don't get home, it's a skeleton. I mean,
Yeah.
it's easy pickings.
Yeah.
And
At that point, it's 7-on-7, but they're down a guy.
yeah. So what does Gene? Okay, we did this earlier in the year. You're Gene Chizik for promotional purposes only for this podcast. What's the game plan here to try to do something different? Do you
Well,
sell
first,
out and stop
before I'm no
running?
longer Gene Chizik, I'm going out and spending some money because my pocketbook just got a lot bigger.
Give me
After I've spent some money and established my family in good position for a while, I am this is a game where I'm coming in with extra pressure packages. So this is not a matter of bringing necessarily 5-6 guys, and certainly not 7 most of the time, because you're not wanting to end up with some of their receivers. Although their receivers don't scare you as much as you might think. I mean, they don't throw a whole lot of fear into you outside. They do not have a T. Higgins or a Sammy Watkins or a Nuke Hopkins or any of those guys. Those guys are not walking through that door for them right now, and that's a big problem for them. That's one of the reasons that this team has 2 losses. I mean, it's not just on DJ. Teams have been able to get some pressure on them at times and cause problems for them because they've been able to do that without those receivers creating a bunch of plays downfield. But what I'm looking at is how many I'm carrying. Let's say if you're Chizik, you bring in on average, I think it's 4 or 5 pressure packages per week. In this one, I'm bringing in like 9 or 10, which is, by the way, around what Bateman brought in every week last year. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to show looks where you're going to end up bringing 4 and dropping 7, bringing 5 and dropping 6. So you're not getting unsound on the back end, but you're bringing that pressure from different places to force their offensive line to pick up some twists and pick up some stunts and pick up some rushers that are filling the gaps on some places. So because their offensive line, they're a little on the younger side, and they're not super talented. Their offensive line has actually been a little bit vulnerable at times to some twist games and some blitz stuff where it's the zone type blitz, or you get a dropper and somebody's coming in from somewhere else and you're getting some free rushers on them that way. They're not getting beat, just beat up front a bunch. But they have given up some stuff on some of that twist game type stuff, at least to my eye when I've watched him. So for me, if I'm Chizik, first of all, you're going to have to play the guys that get more pressure more often. So Rucker has to get more situational pass rush attempts in this game than anybody else. You're going to have to get guys that have had success rushing the passer more reps. And secondly, you're going to have to find ways to use a little bit of twist game, have a stunt paired up with a backer blitz to create some confusion up front and try to get some pressure without making yourself vulnerable on the back end. And you're just going to have to carry more packages in to cause them some problems with that.
Yeah, I'm not even going to call his name. I mean, folks give me a hard time for calling the same person in the YouTube chat all the time. Well, he brings relevant stuff. Greg, I can't say I've seen a lot of stuff off the edge blitzing for.
They brought it.
I haven't, but it hadn't gotten home.
Yeah, the teams have picked it up really well most of the time.
Yeah, so who has a big game for this North Carolina defense to sort of? Well, we haven't even talked about Will Shipley. I know you got some stats there in front of you.
I do.
And Will Shipley's different. Let's talk about him. You got DJU that's 6'5", 230, that he's going to run the ball. You've got Will Shipley, who's a flat-out stud that can carry the ball. I mean, Carolina's got to stop something. Got to try to stop something. What do they do with Shipley?
Yeah, that's the other thing too, because I know people are listening and saying, "Wait a minute, Clemson's offense is not that good." They're not elite, but depending on what metrics you look at, I mean, this is probably you can make a legitimate case. This is the second best offense Carolina will have played this year, outside of Wake Forest. So yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. This is not the Trevor Lawrence offense of old, but they're pretty good. We'll get into it in a little bit, but they've had some turnover issues, which has really hurt them of late. Let me say this: Uiagalelei, as you mentioned, is a big kid. He's been effective running the ball. He's got 671 non-sack yards, 5.2 yards per carry. That's not quite at Drake's level, but pretty close. And he's also broken 36 tackles. So he's a big lumbering guy. They've used him better of late. He had some good runs early against South Carolina. Shipley, for his size, he's not a monster kid. He's 5'11", 205. But he is a really strong runner. And I mentioned earlier Elijah Green's averaging 2.2 yards per carry up the middle. Shipley is averaging 4.9 yards per carry in the A-gaps on 58 carries. So that's a lot of work up the middle, and he's having success. He's got a little bit over 1,000 yards on the ground this year, over 600 yards after contact, and he's broken 45 tackles. So he really is kind of a load for what Brandon Streeter and those guys want to do for the Clemson offense. If you had to choose, which Gene Chizik has to choose, if you had to choose, you want to take away the run. They've had some success of late. Granted, they haven't played any offenses that have really good running attacks. So we talked last week. NC State really didn't have a good ground game, right? And Carolina locked them down, so they did what they needed to do. But it wasn't like they shut down Bam Knight or some of those guys from last year. They'll have to have a very good performance up front to limit both DJ and Shipley in that run game, because they have success running off the edge. They have success running up the middle. They can do a lot of different things. And if you're giving Uiagalelei like 3rd and shorts and asking him to pass it or potentially run, it's going to be not easy, but it's going to be a much more simple game for him. So you have to do a good job on 1st and 2nd down and do your best to kind of limit Clemson, because Dabo Swinney will allow you, or he would like to be able just to kind of pound the ball like Notre Dame did and just move the ball, control the clock, and just wear you out so that he doesn't have to rely on DJ winning the game. You have to stop that first and foremost. And then, as we've already talked about, DJ is a different problem with his ability to throw the ball. But if you have to pick the lesser of two evils, him throwing the ball is probably it.
Yeah, you got to get him on the ground, and you got to. And somebody said in the chat, George Jenkins, on paper, Carolina's in big trouble, but that's why you play the game. Jason, who steps up on defense for Carolina? I mean, you got to believe Cedric Gray will have a big game. But looking at this Clemson offense, we haven't talked about Phil Maffa. I mean, 26 will come in and get some rush yards too if you're not careful. But where's Carolina's best bet here on defense?
If they're gonna win this game, then they need Miles Murphy and Rucker to eat. Those two guys have to play really, really well up front. So whether that happens or not is another question. But they're not winning this game unless those two guys play really well. And of course, there's some questions about who's going to be actually available in the secondary. Right? I mean, we can talk about, whether Storm Duck is going to play. If Storm Duck plays, then I'd put him on that list as well. He needs to play really well. And if not, then you're going to need a really, really good game from Legend Cavazos and
Marcus Allen.
Marcus Allen. You're going to need the corners to hold up, and you're going to need the two guys that have been the most successful at generating pressure and getting penetration to really do that. So you're going to have those two guys up front, and then those corners, whoever the corners on the outside are going to have to hold up. And one guy I'm concerned about against Clemson, by the way, is actually Boykins, because of what Clemson does. They've got a very fast slot receiver, and Boykins, at times teams have run by him a little bit with some stuff. Carolina's generally kept some deep help for him, but Clemson will scheme to get some guys one-on-one with him and try to run by him a little bit. And he's going to have to play really well. He's played well on the whole on the season, but that's an area where they'll try to get a matchup where it'll feel like a slot receiver on a linebacker, because he's kind of that hybrid between a sort of a safety and a backer and a corner. And he kind of is more like a safety and a backer than he is a true corner. And they'll try to get somebody on him and try to run by him a couple times, and he's going to have to hold up.
One thing I see, and Bo Collins is out for Clemson. Somebody asked, did they have injury issues? He's out. He's their number one touchdown guy, number one deep threat guy, averaging 17 yards a catch. But Will Shipley with 30 receptions. And he doesn't have a ton, 30 for 195, but Carolina's shown a propensity of not being able to cover a back out of a backfield. Greg, you're key player on defense for North Carolina.
I think it has to be one of the tackles. I mean, you take your pick, whether it's going to be Hester or Murphy, but somebody just has to be disruptive up the middle. And they've been okay up the middle all year long. Where they've had issues is, not really getting any pressure off the edges. But everything starts in the middle of the defense. And so I think if they have some level of success, and that doesn't mean locking down Will Shipley, but being able to control that point, I think that's key. You got to have somewhere to anchor your defense. And so, I mean, we've talked a lot, especially the last 2 weeks, right? It's line of scrimmage. If you want to be able to win this type of game against an opponent like Clemson, who has won the ACC Championship 6 of the last 7 years, they've won 2 national championships. They know what it is to win in the trenches. If you want to beat that type of team, you got to be stout along the line, because if you're not, forget it. Drake may be able to keep you in the game if he makes some good passes down the field and you score some easy ones. But if you think you're going to beat Clemson and not be able to match them at the line of scrimmage, you're dreaming. And so I think defensively, it's got to be some of those guys up front. And I think it's with Hester and Murphy starting, probably one or both those guys needs to have the game of their life.
How big are turnovers here? I mean, they're random, and except for interceptions, Greg, you've got some stats in front of you.
Yeah, you set me up here. So Clemson has had a little bit of struggles the last month. Why? Turnovers. Clemson has coughed the ball up 15 times in their last 5 games. Only 6 of those are picks. So they've lost 9 fumbles in 5 games, which is crazy.
Who's putting it on the ground?
I don't have those numbers in front of me.
I'll look it up while you're talking.
Okay.
I'll find it.
The issue for Carolina, though, with kind of and this is the interesting. We've talked a lot about the bend don't break, right, and how successful it was in 2015. Teams has chewed up yardage between the 20s, and then Carolina did a good job of shutting them down in the red zone. We've had that conversation. It's not really happening this year. Carolina's not had a lot of success keeping teams out of the end zone once they get down there. But what that team also did in 2015 is they created a lot of turnovers, especially interceptions. This team is not. Carolina is tied for 103rd nationally in forced turnovers at 13. If Carolina is to win this game, I really think they're going to have to force some turnovers. Clemson's lost the turnover margin in those 5 games I just mentioned. Last 5 games, they've lost turnover margin. So if Carolina is able to be opportunistic and force a couple turnovers and just have a little bit of an edge, I mean, every possession matters, right? That's going to go into how they're able to pull off an upset.
Yeah, Clemson doesn't have their who coughed the ball up. But you're right. That's a ton of fumbles. And the thing about, if my memory serves, State put the ball on the ground 4 times, and Carolina couldn't get on it. Or at least there was one where it's bouncing around and guys are jumping on it, and it's like pop rocks down there, and State ends up getting back on it.
All right, so here you go. DJ's had 4. Shipley has lost 4. And I think that's pretty much it.
So their tendency to put it on the ground, Jason. We're about to get to the prediction portion, but what's another thing that's important here? Special teams, kicking game is, it's tough when you miss kicks in overtime. That tends to be highlighted.
Or in regulation, that would have put you potentially in position to win before it got to overtime. I mean,
yeah, State missed one too, so they kind of washed out on that.
But it still hurts when you miss one. You got to take advantage when you got chip shots.
Yeah. So what's a key factor here we haven't talked about before we get to some predictions?
I think we've talked about basically everything. We pulled the meat off this bone, so I say we just get to the predictions.
You're up.
Oh, all right. It's going to be an interesting one. I do think Carolina, and I've said this for the last few weeks, and my opinion on this has not changed just because Carolina has stumbled the last couple of weeks. Carolina has a puncher's chance in this game because you've got Drake May, you've got an NFL wide receiver in Antoine Green, you got another NFL wide receiver in Josh Downs, you got some tight ends who are versatile. You can score points. And, the funny thing is, to beat Clemson, you have to score points. Right? I know that's real deep, real profound, but you got to score points to beat them. And this is a team that does some of the things that some of the teams that have scored against Clemson have been able to do. So I just go back to the South Carolina game last week, and Spencer Rattler, who's not as good as Drake May, and they don't have the same level of wide receivers that North Carolina does. 25 of 39 for 360 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Now, I think if May throws 2 picks, they probably don't win the game. But that 360 yards, 9.2 yards per I think that's per completion, but it might be per attempt, and I'm not looking at the right thing here. No, that's per attempt. 9.2 yards per attempt. You can do that to Clemson if you protect your quarterback and all of that. Carolina can. The problem for me is I think Carolina, to win this game, is going to have to play a more complete game than they've played pretty much at any point this year. And, there's the old saying, defense wins championships. That is false. It's also false that offense wins championships. Complete teams win championships. More complete teams win championships. And Carolina has not played like a complete team through most of this year. They've had a few halves where they've looked like a complete team. But I thought Greg's points about DJ against pressure and against when he's got time to throw, that's huge in this game. And you think about that being the one big weakness that Carolina's got, and then there's some concerns about who's healthy in the secondary. I think Carolina's going to score some points in this game, but I think ultimately Clemson's also going to score some points, and I think it's just going to be enough. So I do think this will be a football game like the 2015 game. Carolina's going to have a shot to win this game, and if they don't turn it over, they're going to have a really good shot. But ultimately, I think the better overall team with more experience in these situations is ultimately the team I'm going to bet on, and that's going to be Clemson. I'm going to go with Clemson winning this game 38-31. Greg's laughing because I think I just nailed Greg's score.
Pretty much, yeah.
Let me looking at some stats here, Greg, while you reformulate your score. Clemson has 96 tackles for loss on the season. Carolina has 45. That number, that's unbelievable. Greg, give me something.
Tommy, you asked about special teams. That's been a strength for Carolina all year long. They've been really good. You look at S&P Plus, they're 29th in special teams, which is really good. Clemson is good across the board, and they're 22nd in special teams. And to Jason's point, Clemson's 33rd in offense, 26th in defense, 22nd in special teams. So that's not the elite national championship caliber team that we've seen Clemson have before. That's still really good. And there's a reason they're atop the ACC right now. I agree with everything that Jason said. We talk a lot about matchups, and to your point there, Tommy, and as Jason kind of laid out, you got to get pressure on DJ. Carolina struggled getting pressure. Clemson's prone to turn the ball over. Carolina struggled to force turnovers. Like some of those things just don't work in Carolina's favor. I agree that Drake May gives you a puncher's chance. And if he has a well of a game and has another Pitt performance, Carolina can steal this one. But if he is not elite, I just don't see how Carolina can win. I didn't have it exactly as Jason's, but I had it Clemson winning 38-27. I think Carolina's competitive. I think they have a respectful performance that the fan base can appreciate, but I don't think Carolina is quite there yet to be able to play spoiler for Clemson. That may come next year, but we'll have to wait and see. But I think Carolina loses this one on Saturday night.
Somebody in the chat, my man Bull Hill. And Bull Hill, I just blocked a bot and didn't catch you in it.
Yeah, the bots seem to know exactly when we're about to wrap up. It's amazing.
Really.
They come in at like the exact same time
every show
before we wrap up every show. It's wild.
It's like they're waiting for you to walk out the club and catch you on the way out. Somebody at Bull Hill, how many tackles for loss has Carolina allowed? That number would be 78.
Yikes.
So they've gotten 45 tackles for loss. They've allowed 78. They've gotten 16 of those were sacks out of the 45. 34 of those 78 are sacks for the defense. I'm not picking a score right now. And I'm not doing it because we're doing a live show at 1200 Graham Street before the game. A ton of Inside Carolina people are going to be down there. Y'all can come down there and hear my pick.
You're going to get swayed, Tommy.
I can feel it.
Just us saying that they've got to, that, you know, I can see Tommy in that live show going, well, you know, there is a puncher's chance. I mean, Drake May does Drake May things, so you're telling me there's a chance.
I need more information. I sat in that stadium 2015 and never thought they had a chance, and then they did that.
And Tommy, they were down by 19 in the third quarter of that game.
And
had a chance. So.
And I know one of those officials from that game, and I still give him grief every time I see him about the same thing. So anyway, I'll pick on the pregame show. I see live at 1200 Graham Street. Come join us. There's a ton of Inside Carolina people there. Great tailgate. Shout out to the 200 plus people that have been in this chat. You know, it's kind of disappointing that when they win, there's a bunch of people. When they lose, there's not. So I don't know. I guess people put the pitchforks up.
We're gonna have to keep that Jedi Shogun question that just came into the chat for the next for the postseason analysis.
I need to mark it. Here's the deal. Folks have asked a lot of questions about portal and this and that. We'll talk about that next week. We'll have a big, get out of Dodge podcast when the season's over. We'll talk about a lot of stuff. But this is straight ACC and Clemson and championship game talk. Greg Barnes and I talked to David Hale. I will tack that audio on the backside of this. So y'all guys, you need to listen to that. I know a lot of people say, well, David Hale said Cedric Gray didn't deserve to be ACC All First Team. He didn't say that. He said that he was surprised he was leading vote getter and probably shouldn't have been. There's a difference.
He's right about that, actually.
I mean, I've always said if you're on the best player on the worst defense, you're never going to get voted first team anything. Props to Cedric Gray. He had a great year. But I was surprised, and I think David Hale sort of laid it out as to why. But anyway,
and it's kind of crazy, by the way, that Drake Thomas was the number 3 vote getter for Defensive Player of the Year in the ACC and was second team All ACC at his own position and was not behind any of the players.
Yeah, that's crazy.
ACC voting sometimes for these things is really strange for me,
and that's why people get twerked up about it, and I don't understand it. I mean, Storm Duck made second team. And granted, Storm played great since the Pittsburgh game, but the Pittsburgh game was in late October. And so anyway, grain of salt on that stuff, but props to those guys for getting first team All ACC stuff. And Drake, of course, swept all the awards. I think he's got to have that type of game on Saturday night. It's going to be a hell of a night in Charlotte, man. All these Charlotte players, all these guys that are from Charlotte, ACC, Carolina, and Clemson. It's hard to believe we're at this point. Jason Staples will talk to you pregame. Greg Barnes, I hope to see you in Charlotte. It's been the Game Plan Podcast, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Stay tuned after these ads for Next Level Audio with Greg and I and David Hale. Worth a listen. Boys, be safe.